Hello and welcome back to On Authentic Leadership with the Colonel and the Coach. You have Colonel Matt Smith, United States Air Force retired, and Cam Ellsworth as your host today. We have a very special guest, BigDogg Rhone, who comes to us from industry, where he's a leader in the military industrial complex and a leader of both men and women as well as systems. And he is a product integrator and he is exceptionally good at what he does. BigDogg served in the Air Force for nearly 25 years. He has commanded at the group in the squadron levels, and he had the opportunity to deploy on a multitude of occasions. And he had assignments all over the world. And I had the opportunity of meeting BigDogg back in the 1999-2000 timeframe, where both of us were stationed at Tinker Air Force Base. And I think that everyone is going to truly enjoy the perspective that BigDogg brings to not just to leadership, but to how to think through things and how to be successful and how to carry yourself so that you can lead in an authentic manner. I'd like to introduce my co-host at this time, Cam Ellsworth.
Yeah, thanks. BigDogg was one of the first people from your world that you introduced me to. And, again, as people get to know us, we'll get to see the progression of our relationship. But he was one of the first guys that I got to meet inside your world. And when you start to learn about the military and about things that you guys did, you quickly understand how small the community is that actually went on to serve. And again, I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1% that actually serves in the U.S. military. And so I'm in the 99%. And I think a lot of people are in that 99%. And getting a front row seat to talk to you about what you learned, how you can, put that forward is something that I've been very fortunate and trying to express that in today's episode with yourself and with BigDogg. I think people are going to really enjoy some of the stories and lessons that you guys are sharing and some of the specialties that you guys have picked up. And again, that I've been fortunate enough to, learn from.
If you enjoy the podcast today with BigDogg, you can anticipate in the future we're going to have a lot of guests, obviously not exactly like BigDogg, however, guests from a multitude of different industry, from academia, from athletics, and whatnot. But if you're someone who'd like to be a guest on Authentic Leadership with the Colonel and the Coach, we ask you to send us a note, shoot us a text, leadership at thecolonelandthecoach.com. And we'd love to have you on our show where we talk about leadership, we talk about life experiences, we talk about just arguably what's going on in the world and how that's shaping someone's ability to lead in an authentic manner. Hello, everyone. We've got BigDogg Rhone as our special guest today on the Colonel and the Coach. And BigDogg, thank you very, very much for taking the time out of your exceptionally busy schedule to talk with Cam and myself.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. This is the fun stuff. I'll give up a whole lot to do stuff like this, especially with you guys. So thanks.
Yeah. So just by way of introduction for the folks who unbelievably may not know BigDogg, he is an Air Force veteran of over 20 years and now works in industry as someone who helps warfighters get the capabilities that they need as essentially a product integrator, making sure that our capabilities are what we need to fight the next fight. And also, my co-host is Cam Ellsworth. He is also known as the Coach and brings with him nearly 20 years of experience as a head coach at the collegiate level. Prior to that, as someone who served as an assistant and also a lot of time playing hockey himself at a very high level. So anyways, welcome.
BigDogg, when I started this with relationship with Colonel Smith, and you were one of the first people that he kind of introduced me to in his world, and that's been a really fun experience for me. But you had told a story at one point, maybe the impact he had on you, and it was early in the morning one day, and he had agreed to, I guess, stay up and listen to one of your pitches. And again, you'll tell it better, but I think this would be a great kind of stepping off point.
Yeah, thanks, Cam. the story. He wasn't staying up. He got up. Maybe he was up all night. I don't know. But in the Air Force, we had opportunity to go to what we call the United States Air Force Weapons School. Smitty was a weapons school graduate long before I think I knew what weapons school was. But I was on my spin up time. And so Smitty had just gotten to Oklahoma and didn't really know me that well, but he knew that I was a person who he could help. So we got up at 3 a.m. one time and he shows up. It's an hour-long presentation. To be exact, it was 50 minutes plus or minus 5. I'm sure I went well over, and I'm sure that the things that I presented were well below the weapons school standards. So I can imagine him at 3 a.m. thinking, man, why did I get up for this? But one of the things that really, really stuck with me is we got finished with the presentation. He gives me his debrief, the things that he needs to do that I need to do to get ready. And he said, there's one thing that I noticed about you, Big Dog. I'm like, hey, sure, what's that? He said, you're really competent and capable. He said, but one thing that I'm concerned about is you're such an asshole. I'm not sure anybody's really going to listen to you. And so I kind of was taken aback because I didn't know him that well. This was before our 25-year relationship now. I was like, who's this guy think he is? Because I'm not. Well, you're a jerk, right? But come to find out, that was pretty prophetic. He was right on. And that sort of started our relationship because I knew a lot of people probably felt a certain way, and I know I came off a certain way, but nobody said it to me in such a way that was truthful, candid, and caring. And so that, whether he knew it or not, that started our relationship. And a lot of things that I bounced off of Smitty during my still very immature days was, how does this come across? And sometimes they were unsolicited, and he would let me know. So the fact that he cared was an example of not only how you help somebody prepare for a very tough course, but also how you prepare somebody to deliberately develop and become better and set the example. So that's our professional side, which also tied into the personal side of our friendship. And I love telling that story, and I normally get that same reaction. People laugh, and it's like, well, he nailed you perfectly.
I mean, honestly, if you could speak a little bit again, you're from Texas, right? And played football. So there's that athletic side. And I think one of the unique things with Matt and myself is these two different worlds colliding. And you had both worlds, but there is a sense of confidence / arrogance, I think, to be an elite athlete, to be a college athlete, and maybe how you've taken that feedback from Matt and maybe repurposed or taken the opportunity to use that a little different way to serve others or to communicate with others, so you don't come off that way.
Yeah, I got to tell you, so I grew up in South Texas in San Antonio, and I often say this, if you're a healthy male, there's only really one thing that you do from an athletic perspective in South Texas, and that's to play football. Two, this won't surprise you, but that wasn't the first time I heard feedback like that from Smitty. The feedback Smitty gave me. So two of my coaches, high school coaches, who were probably the biggest influences in my life other than my father, they died recently. One suffered from Alzheimer's, just like my father did. And I will tell you, as I think about those two coaches, Coach Bruce Cannon and Coach Jim Turnbow, both of them played a profound role. So growing up in Texas, football was, I don't think it came easy, but I enjoyed working at it. And then we had some good results from it. I remember the first time that I scored a touchdown. I think my freshman year, I was running down the field, like a quarterback of all people threw this great block, and it was like an 88-yard touchdown. And I was, man, you throw your hand in the air, you're running down the field. And as soon as I got to the sidelines, expecting my coach to be like, man, this is awesome. He was like, why don't you act like you've done that before? Or act like you expected to be there. So that was profound, right? I'm like, wait a second, you're taking my moment. And his point was like, dude, you didn't do that by yourself. Like, you didn't all of a sudden break through 11 tackles, pitch the ball to yourself, and put 6 points on the board for the team and not for you. So that's one thing that I always remembered. Another thing that he told me, I sprained my ankle. You put your ice in your foot in a bucket, and this is probably after some success. I think my sophomore year. He said, "Hey, take your foot out of that bucket of ice." And I'm like, "Huh?" He said, "Take your foot out." So I took my foot out of the ice bucket, and he said, "You see that hole that's there?" He said, "If you were to leave this team, that's the hole you would leave. Obviously, there's no hole." Right. So his point was, dude, quit reading the newspaper releases, quit reading the press, and then recognize that you have some success, but it's not because of you. So those are some of the things that I took away. The other things that football teaches you is winning. We always talk about this generation and, all the trophies and whatnot, but losing is huge. I remember I had to write a paper one time in high school and what do you love doing more than anything else? And I said winning. But the paper I really wrote about was about how much I hated losing. And I think that the lessons about losing are probably just as important as winning, because when you lose, you're a loser. That has such a negative connotation nowadays. Like, the fact is, you lost. And by definition, I mean, I'm not Webster's or Merriam, but you're a loser. So what do you do about it now? I read a Nick Saban book. As much as I hate Nick Saban, it's only because he wins all the time. But one of his things is, so what, now what? So you lost the game. Now what are you going to do? But that also applies when you do well. My senior year, we had a really good season and we lost at the very end. And, but through all the successes, it's, so what, now what? You just won. You just had a great game. Now what? What are you going to do? You had a great year, your freshman or sophomore, junior. What are you going to do? So I think I take that with me. I try to take that with me now into the professional life. As I was a younger person in the Air Force, I think I went to the extreme of wanting to win and thought that the way that I prepared myself and the way that I looked at myself and the way that I think pushed myself was the way everybody else should be pushed. And I didn't have the maturity, as Smitty pointed out, to recognize that one of the best skill sets of a team player, especially a leader, is to understand how everybody else is motivated. Telling them that they suck, telling them that it wasn't good enough, it doesn't work for everybody. It might work for you, Cam. It might work for your hockey team. It might work for Smitty. It might not work for Keegan. It may not work for Smitty's son. It might not work for my daughters. In fact, I got 2 daughters. That works for one of them. It doesn't work for the other one. And so then there's, how do you, as a leader, figure out how to motivate your people, your teammates? A lot of times we look at people and we figure, man, they're just not good enough. They're not doing it. And we don't look at ourselves as leaders to figure out, have we given them the right resources? Resources includes training, it includes equipment, but it also includes our time to deliberately develop them. And I think that's a lot of what I missed and didn't quite get, my PS phase, my pre-Smitty phase. It took a lot of growing up. And there are a lot of other people who gave me examples that I could look at, but I think my turning point, I felt, was probably about, mid-captain time, 2003, 4, 5. I went back to the weapons school to teach and had an opportunity to be exposed to how to develop, some top performers, and recognize that all these lessons that I've been learning, that people have taken the time to give, it's time to apply those. So I think that's where I felt like I turned from focusing on how I could teach people to do things versus how people need to be taught to do things and developed. I know that's a lot of words, so I'll stop, but I get excited about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's great stuff, BigDogg. And you hit on a couple of things, and I know you've had a look at the website so far, but we have pillars, and you hit on legitimately every single one of them. But trust, communication, accountability, seeing the good in your team, and purposeful leadership. However, none of those pillars are anything without the foundation, which we refer to as people. And I think, just singing your graces for a second, you always, every team that you're a part of and every organization that you lead, and present organization included, you always somehow make everybody feel like they are a critical aspect of the team. And the other thing is you were always quick to accept responsibility for, for the quote unquote failures, and then of course give everybody else the praise. And I know that all the books say that, right? They say, well, you got to shoulder the responsibility of any failures and so on and so forth. But I think one of the things that you do really, really well, and how you do it, I have no idea, but you always make everyone feel special. And I think that foundation piece for you is arguably attributable to a lot of the success that you've had. And I just wanted to point that out, and also at the same time give you an opportunity to comment on how people and the role that they play, whether that's athletes, whether that's professionals that are out there in industry or in the military. But any thoughts just on that aspect of things?
Yeah, so I appreciate that, Smitty. One of the things that I work really hard at, I believe, in this world of distractions
Yes.
and tasks, is trying to make the person you're talking to or the people you're talking to feel like they're the most important person in the room.
Right.
There's name, right? And understanding who that person is.
Right.
But as a leader, when you talk to
Right.
people on your team, it's so hard to not look at your watch. You have your phone, you have somebody else walking by, but to like stay singularly focused on them.
Right.
What I feel is amazing is that the 2 minutes that you can give to somebody as a leader or just as a teammate walking down the hallway, that could have been the 2 minutes that they needed to just take a break, to complain. But so I feel like I do put a lot of time into, when I'm talking to people, making them feel like they're the most important person. And I think that sticks with them. I can't remember the quote, but it's something along the lines of, people don't remember what you do, they remember how you make them feel.
Right.
And very few people feel like they're important in this day because they always feel like they're a distraction. And then I think that if you go back to the team, when people feel like they are important, you've got them, right? You've got their 100%. You've got their 100%, whether they're tired. Now, one thing we have to remember is our 100%. I just told Cam I was in the gym this morning, right? Today wasn't a 100% day. I gave 100% of what I could give, but tomorrow I hope I can give a little more. But people are
Right.
going to give you their 100% when they feel like they're important to you, and I try to remember that. So it's almost self-serving in the sense that you make them feel important, but that's how you get your team to perform, I feel.
Yeah, I think one of the other lessons again that stuck with me early on was we've talked about some humility, but also again, you were very good by all accounts. Again, Division I football player, and went to the Air Force Academy, and Colonel Smith went to Plymouth State, right? And I think as we get out, or anybody, they have a certain amount of accomplishments, and you had spoke to the ability to then like break down those barriers that maybe somebody in, whether it's the Air Force or business or life or team, maybe doesn't have that Air Force Academy experience, but could be a valuable, or again, in Colonel Smith's point, like what did ROTC and came in and was somebody that had an impact in you. I don't know, again, if you could speak just about that humility or seeing that good in some people that, again, on paper, maybe that's a different standard, but again, seeing that maybe there's some people that have really knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, I always reference the weapons school. I think a lot of things in life relate to football, and they relate to our experiences as weapons officers. And one of those, the tenets, is humility of a weapons officer. And this is probably not in the book anywhere in the dictionary. Maybe it is. So my definition of humility is that walking into a room and understanding that there may be somebody out there who has an experience that is more applicable, more useful, more important than yours. So you mentioned Smitty going to ROTC, or I work now in an engineering tech company. I'm a history major, and I've got about that much experience in engineering. So when I walk into a room, I know that when we have to talk about prototype development or systems engineering, that I have nothing to say. For the same token, when we talk about how maybe we interact and improve customer intimacy with the military, which is the tribe that I came from in the command and control battle management world, maybe they should listen. However, I also have to recognize that just because I'm talking about how people from my previous tribe in the Air Force are going to use things or need to use tools. When an engineer talks about that, how we should do that, I can't automatically say, dude, this is my world. I get this, right? I have to leave some space for the fact that they may know better. Their idea may be better than mine. And then so I have to truly listen. So I think that's where the humility comes in. And so if you apply that to leadership, just because you are sitting at the head of the table when you walk into your staff meeting in the military, and just because you're the colonel or the lieutenant colonel, just because you're the head coach, doesn't mean that your ideas are the best or are valid. In fact, you have to leave room for the fact that the boys and girls that are putting on skates and a helmet, or the boys and girls that are walking to an airplane, or that are going to go talk to their teams, they probably have a better idea of what's going on and how to execute than you. One of the things I feel like a leader should do is they're responsible for the culture. But what I learned, at least what I feel in my experience, is that the leader has about that much to do with the culture, right? I think the leader has to set the environment. They have to set the conditions for a healthy culture. And then they have to find the people who really set the culture, which are the folks on the team. Your team captain, in the military, that staff sergeant, that captain, that middle tier person who is an influencer, that's who creates the culture. But you have to give them that environment. So I think that's one of the dichotomies of leadership, is that leaders are responsible for the culture, but I feel like they can't really set the culture. They can set the conditions and have to find the influencers. So that kind of humility, I believe, is something that leaders, if you want a high performing team, leaders have to adapt and adopt.
That's awesome. So, BigDogg, you mentioned the staff sergeant piece. I think a tech sergeant in E6 in other services is probably, from a culture perspective, probably our most critical rank. I don't necessarily know how you feel about that, but as you were saying that, I thought, I'm not marginalizing the staff sergeant. Staff sergeants are awesome, but like tech sergeant that takes that strategic sort of senior NCO vision and then takes it to the folks who actually get the job done, make the mission happen. And you probably have those people in your organization now that your go-to person that's just going to make it happen. And I equate it a little bit to, like, from a football perspective. And again, I don't know hockey all that well, but that's kind of like your fullback, right? Or like the dude the guard that's pulling, that's throwing the block, doesn't get any credit whatsoever. BigDogg just went for an 88-yard scant into the end zone, but yet that person is just going to run back, grab a cup of Gatorade, go sit down on the bench and wait for the next series. And so I don't know. I've always felt that special, that senior captain, maybe not yet major, and that tech sergeant, that E6 who just is able to just, not to say they can't be an NCO. Maybe it's not their time yet, but they understand strategic intent and they translate that and they make the culture what it needs to be to get the job done. So anyways, that's a great, good.
Smitty, can I pull on that thread a little bit? Your pulling guard analogy, your fullback analogy, they go do their job and then they go have their 11th surgery of their career because they got beat up and you never hear about it. It's like the tech sergeant who goes and gets beat up by the airman, maybe by his captain, her captain boss, but they're getting it done despite all the knocks, right? That we don't ever get to see sitting at the head of that table.
Right. But again, I don't know. I would argue when I look at leaders like you, I've seen Cam do this time and time again, just being able to not just hold them accountable for doing what they're supposed to be doing, but seeing the good in them and recognizing them and making them feel special. Because again, to your point earlier, it's just, I think the phrase is, they're never going to remember what you said, but they are going to remember how you made them feel. And going to the sideline or going to the bench and recognizing them for what they did, and it is special. And just as Cam was in his last playoff run, I can't tell you how many times I heard Cam say that. Guys coming back to the bench and not coming back to the bench because they're gassed, because their line is over, their shift is over, but also saying, hey, dude, I saw that block. I saw you fight. I saw you block and do all that. And I would like to get to a point just in the world today where we recognize people for those little things, because it's those little things that keep you going from day to day, from week to week, from month to month.
I'm going to pull on that one too a little bit. I call it the quick wins or the small victories, right? You just said Cam said, hey man, I saw that block. And maybe that is the player that's struggling on that line. All he needs is saw that. Next time, there's a bigger block. Next time, there's a better pass, right? So it's the small victories that I think we have to, when people are struggling, find a victory. As a leader, find a way for them to do a quick win.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would pull on that as well. And I've found that, especially in the last maybe 5-7 years, and maybe it's just my transition into being a head coach, but like the pride in taking that role, whether that's been minimized because the guy scoring the touchdown or the goal is so stood up in the world of social media or in the world of excitement, that there's less and less maybe understanding that it takes the entire team. And again, whatever analogy we want to use, but I felt like one of the things that we've tried to do, at least in my spot, is get guys and really celebrate, hey, you are great because you play this minute and this minute and you do this. And when it's really like the toughest, right? Like we're defending a 1-goal lead, you're the guy we're calling on. So it's not that you're not going to be on Instagram. You're not going to be on there's an underbelly, but again, that respect, and then to be able to hoist them up in front of a group. Again, I don't know that anybody does it perfect, but it just feels like culturally, again, we're celebrating these monster wins, and that group of people underneath that are doing great things need to get that recognition.
I love watching sports, obviously, and you're watching the March Madness right now, and it's one of the things I try to lock in on is like all the guys who are not getting the. I also think it's goofy, by the way, at halftime when they interview players. Like they got to go in there and talk, man. But the people who don't get interviewed and the excitement that they have from being there, the role players, and I think that goes to industry as well, or any leadership. You find your role players, and you talk about giving people victories. Everybody's good at something. Most people are good at something. Finding that is a leader's responsibility to get that person who's not the pulling guard effectively, get them to pull and get them to find defensive end to go hit and smack in the face.
BigDogg, you and I have talked about this before, but I feel like it is often we celebrate someone out of their role, maybe after they're gone, or maybe after they've even passed, right? And I think that it's, in today's day and age, slowing down to recognize people for who they are, treating them with dignity and respect, being kind, caring for them, and placing their needs before yours is something I think that sometimes we give lip service to, but it's not necessarily something that is part of our daily, cross check for whatever the reason. Maybe it's not manly, or maybe, quote unquote manly, or maybe it's just not, it doesn't show the level of toughness and stuff like that. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't say that again, that I think that you do a fantastic job, whether it's through a text, through an email, through a phone call, or whatever. And I, again, in your current organization, I hope that those people that you work with feel valued, because I'm just your bro and I'm your friend and your colleague for the last 25, 26 years. And I think that you make people feel like that. And I know that I feel like that. And just, I would be remiss if I did this podcast, I didn't tell you that's how I felt. So anyways, bottom line, thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. As we're all very task oriented people, and sometimes you keep getting the tasks done, and before the
Yeah.
end of the day, before you go to bed, you're like, oh man, it's 8 o'clock, and
Right.
and I feel bad. And you and I have had this conversation because it'll
Sure.
be a day and a half or 2 days when somebody will send a text. I'm like, oh man,
Yeah.
or Carp will send a text, and then I feel
Yeah.
bad, and then I think that's the
Yeah.
value of the friendship and the brotherhood, is everybody understands. But
Sure.
thank you. I do try, and I fail a lot at that.
I gotta just address the call sign thing, not BigDogg's call sign. BigDogg, were you 3-4 from weapons school?
I was, yes.
Yeah. So Cam, I gotta peel this back real quick. So when you go to weapons school, when you get selected to go to weapons school, they have obviously a call sign event, right? Where if the call sign that you had before, like if, hey, what's your call sign? It's Cam. Yeah, your call sign's not going to be Cam. You're going to be something else, right? So I showed up with Smitty. BigDogg showed up with BigDogg. And arguably, BigDogg's call sign as BigDogg had a greater chance of standing than probably mine did, which is very, very generic. However, the 3-4 call sign, and I'll just give the Reader's Digest version, is it goes back years and years and years. And I was 3-4 Victor. I don't know what you were, BigDogg, from an alphabet perspective. 97. So four, you were probably like alpha something or rather, because
I'm embarrassed. I don't remember exactly what it is, but yeah.
no worries. So real quick, Cam, is one of the person in the original, like, I don't know, early weapons school class, Michael Crowley, and he now goes by the call sign Krusty Crowley, shows up at weapons school. He is an air defense sort of guy from what was call sign Bigfoot, which is the air defense sector for the Northwest at the time. And they say, what's your call sign? Well, when you are in the air defense sector, you say your Bigfoot or whatever, and then you say your number so that the pilot that you're talking to knows who you're talking to. Well, he goes, yeah, I'm 3-4, I'm Bigfoot 3-4, which is essentially Bigfoot 34. He's the 34th controller of that organization. And so no one could believe that he would defend his actual call sign in that capacity. So they said, copy that. You now are forever known as 3-4. So for the entire several months that he was there, he was 3-4. Well, that set a precedent for every single weapons school class after that. They would identify someone as 3-4. So by the time I get there, right, I'm 97 Bravo and I'm 3-4 Victor. So we've gone that far in the alphabet. And because I worked for him before, I was a legacy. And I think BigDogg, I think you're a legacy to a certain extent, right? Which is why you were also identified as 3-4. So it didn't matter, Cam. You could do this elaborate call sign defense. They're like, yep, thank you very much. You are no longer whatever. Great call sign defense. You're 3-4. So I was 3-4 because I'd worked for this guy at one point. BigDogg goes up in school, whatever, 6, 7, 8 classes later. And now BigDogg is 3-4. So to this day, every single class has a 3-4. And so I would say it's less so much of a funny thing as it is an honor to actually be a 3-4.
And before we jump, like, you guys have referred to weapons school, and how do you get into weapons school? How do you get selected? What kind of percentage of that 1% are we talking about to go to the weapons school?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and Smitty, of course, being a senior weapons officer here, will correct me to 100%. So the weapons school is something that I feel that most type A personalities who seek a challenge above all else strive to get selected to go to. Now, I say that they challenge above all else because there are a lot of people who are type A personalities who are great, who choose the family, who choose not to do it, who choose a different path. And that's awesome because that's important to them, and probably more important than the challenge of weapons school, which in a lot of cases they may be right. But in order to go to the weapons school, first get proficient at your job, then become an instructor in your position, then become a proficient instructor at your position. And then only after you've been instructor for, I think it was a year or 2 years at the time, are you able to apply for weapons school. I don't know how many people applied for my class, for the air battle manager community, but we had 3 people that were selected. As I got to be an instructor and was helping select people who were able to go, classes were between 3 and 5 people. And we had about, anywhere from 15 to 30, depending on the year, people who actually applied. So very small percentage of the instructors that are across our 1,500 person community applied. Of those that actually applied, met the criteria, we selected a very small amount, again, 3 to 5. And so the goal of the weapons school, when it first started back in the fees, was to teach people to be the best aerial gunners, to people to be the best tacticians, ace of the base. And that quickly evolved into, how do you teach people to do that? And now at the tactical level, you're teaching people how to be the instructor of instructors. You're teaching people how to employ their platforms expertly. For our community, we're teaching people how to integrate and employ multiple platforms to meet a grander objective. And then that went from being the best person in your squadron, the best instructor, the most talented instructor in your squadron, or the instructor that the commander or the operations officer leans on to be the combat conscience. And the Air Force, as we started to get into the wars, and this is probably pre-Desert Storm, or Desert Storm was the first time that I remember reading about it, where they took these weapons officers, these people who have spent hours and years perfecting their craft and teaching people how to do it, and put them in planning cells to plan things like Desert Storm. And so now at the operational level, so one level above your squadron, the tactical level, now you're planning wars at the operational levels. How do you plan campaigns? So Operation Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, things like that. The weapons officers are the people they look to go and put that plan together, number one. And then number two, I think more importantly, is to help make sure that the rest of the teams, the squadrons, the groups, the wings are ready to go fight and execute that plan. So Smitty will correct me.
Yeah. So Cam, just one thing to add, just from I guess beyond the tactician perspective, and the opportunity to be able to influence the organization and the unit and how you go about doing that, I think has become not just been the science of being a weapons officer, but that's the art of being a weapons officer. And so I think, one of the reasons why I got up at whatever 1:30 in the morning to be at a 3 o'clock brief for BigDogg is because I obviously saw that BigDogg was going to graduate from weapons school. There was just no doubt about that. Despite the fact that he says he's not smart, he's actually very smart. And despite the fact that, he says he needed to refine some things, certainly he needed to refine some things, but I saw the greater good in BigDogg. And I saw that this is going to be somebody who's going to have a massive impact, and not just as a captain or as an ops officer, as a squadron commander or group commander, or, if he wanted to, a wing commander, but someone who's going to have an impact throughout his entire life. And so I knew right then that I wasn't necessarily as smart as he was. And I knew that I probably couldn't, eventually brief the air-to-air intercept and our impact on that as well as him as time went on. But I knew that I could sort of round out him and make him as good as I thought that I could make him, so that he could have that same impact in the future. And I had those same people when I went to weapons school. One that comes up in particular is Greg Gio, goes by Gooey. He's now a combatant commander. He's in charge of Northcom, Northern Command, which is all of North American defense of North America. And at the time, maybe I didn't realize the importance of it, but over time, I realized, like, wow, this guy's doing this for me. I think that I need to in turn do this for other people. And then the other thing is just what BigDogg said about the Type A personality. Obviously, a BigDogg athlete, a very strong, personality, high level of intellect, can make an impact just by how he carries himself. Well, I think that as an Air Force, we've done a better job now of saying, well, maybe not everyone is the Type A. Maybe not everyone's the athlete. Maybe there are some, just like the example that BigDogg used out there. Maybe there are engineers that we need to be able to influence, or maybe there's people that are ABMs that actually have an engineering background, and we need to bring them on board because they might be able to influence some people someday. And I think that it's that view of what it means to be a weapons officer it takes all kinds, that it's not just a one size fits all. I honestly think, Dog, I think the weapons school has done a great job of incorporating other communities into the fold, because they know that it's not just, air to air, air to ground, battle management, command and control, integrating space effects, cyber effects, information warfare. It's all of that stuff together to create, an effect as an air force, an air and space force, to get after the objective. So long answer to a short question, Cam, but hopefully that helps provide some additional context.
Smitty, if I can again add something to that, those lessons, we
Yeah.
talk humble, approachable, credible. We say that, and I think sometimes it gets to be cliche, but what you just mentioned on bringing in the rest of the community, where it's not just, an air to air person or a gunnery range person, people who wear G suits, which are important, but the way that that place taught us to integrate and to find the best of each of the different mission or MDSs or aircraft or specialties. We try to take that into industry as well, because you mentioned the engineers, right? There might be an engineer who's a cyber engineer and you have zero idea of how to use that person, but the way that we learned about other platforms and other people's skill sets, those same questions we asked when you're sitting around the mission planning table for 15 hours on a how goes it, and your fifth time you've redone the plan, you learn to ask questions early and become more efficient at that, or proficient. And so I think that is something that I definitely took away from the weapons school, is how do you find people's skill sets and how do you take those skill sets and try to apply it to whatever task you have.
What again, we talk about 25 years. I know one of the impactful moments that Colonel Smith has talked actually this year, he talked a little bit about night one, and that after 9/11 there was obviously an objective, and Matt was on the operating a first one unit, and he was on that first plane or a part of night one, and BigDogg, I think you've told me a little bit about what you were doing, and again, if you could give that again much better than I could, but just where that kind of looked, or how that looked. Sorry.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, night one, I was in Turkey in the bowling alley watching Smitty's teams drop bombs. The way that story went down is I was actually deployed during 9/11, and one of the first things that I had opportunity to do was to help plan the response, the first response for Afghanistan. So that was huge. Fast forward, we go back and we think we're doing Operation Southern Watch in 2003. Right? We're doing Operation Southern Watch, and they said, "Hey, if there's 1% chance that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, then that means he had weapons of mass destruction, and we're going to go do it." So again, found myself with an opportunity just because we happened to be deployed at the time. I was stationed at Kadena Air Base in Japan, but we were deployed to Saudi Arabia. I was the squadron weapons officer. So back to what we talked about, a bunch of weapons officers got pulled into the Air Operations Center, into the planning cell. I said, let's put this plan together for Iraqi freedom. So we put the plan together. As you can imagine, some sleepless nights working with the same people that Smitty has talked about, trying to figure out this plan. And then the U.S. AWACS team deployed, and for a bunch of different reasons, aircraft type, sensors capabilities and whatnot, wanting to keep the team together. They took our team that was in Southern Watch, moved us up to Turkey to execute night one of the war. The challenge with Turkey at the time was, by the time it was time for night one, they said, "You guys, you're not flying out of Turkey." A bunch of political things that had gone on. So essentially, we were grounded. But because we put the plan together, I had my watch. I was like, "Up here, no, 30 more seconds. Here we go. First bombs drop." Right. So we laugh about this and the fact that I was stuck in Turkey with our team, just mad at the world because we put all this time and energy into this. But I will tell you, the things that helped me deal with my own ego and getting mad and being pissy because we couldn't fly is when Smitty flew. When I heard the reports of what Smitty did, another great friend of ours, Trent Carpenter, Carp, who happened to be on the ground much closer than any of us were, when I heard that they thought it was a solid plan, they thought it was an executable plan, that's where I think all these lessons about, from football and all the things that we've done about being a team player come back, where it's how selfish of me to be mad because I and our team couldn't fly the first night of this thing. Um, but the people that we love most in the world got to go do that. as part of, in part because of our efforts. Now, I'm sure they changed the plan. I'm sure they had some things that adapted, but so that took probably about a good month of me getting over myself. But the more I talked to them, the more that I heard stories, the more I was like, man, I think we did okay. And I got to tell you, and this is no slam to the brothers and sisters that were with me. I think it makes sense after you get over the emotion of it. It made sense, the reason that they kicked us out of the South and moved us to the North. But yeah, so that was hard for a while. But the fact that they did it, and you go back and hear all the successes, to just play a small part of that was I was over the emotion of not being called into the game on night one.
Cam, the one thing I'd like to add to that is, in addition to to BigDogg's team, literally spending months helping us succeed through his mission planning efforts, which it's not about the plan, it's about the planning, right? Is kind of how I've always thought about it. And it's what's an NFL play last, BigDogg, or a college play last 6 seconds,
right?
right?
Yep, 3.5 seconds is normal. 6 seconds for the long run.
Right. So, but think about how many hours and minutes and whatever of practice went into making sure that play was executed, or deviations or variations of that play were executed and stuff like that. But the one thing, Cam, that you and I haven't necessarily talked about is, and I know we're spending a lot of time on the weapons officer piece, but as a weapons officer, you get an opportunity to create the manual, right? The lessons identified, and turn them into lessons learned someday. What a lot of that just gets done that we don't talk about is, after all of that happened, Cam. So after the 9/11s, after the enduring freedom, the Iraqi freedom, making sure that all his lessons were captured. BigDogg, myself, Carp, others, we spent hours, days, I mean weeks, really, like 2 weeks, rewriting the volume, which articulates how you're supposed to employ not the last war, the next war, or the next conflict, or the next exercise, or whatever. And I think I would argue, BigDogg, the perspective that you brought from a planning perspective, and then not having done it, and I'm not marginalizing the fact that you haven't done it, but the fact that you said, this is what we planned to, this is what we meant, and what did you guys do, and this is what we did. It helped us create a better volume. And you're talking about this volume, Cam, that's 250, 300 pages. This isn't a pamphlet. This is an entire thing, which is huge. Chapters, 8, 9 chapters with appendices that go from A to Z and everything in between. I'm not sure that I mentioned to you that before, BigDogg, but arguably when we were doing that sort of post-war analysis, if you will, post-conflict, post-deployment analysis, there was a lot of work that went into that. And I think that, going forward, obviously we've spent a lot of more years in Southwest Asia. I think that the efforts were not for naught. They were meaningful, and they were purposeful, and I appreciated that. And that's just things they don't tell you in weapons school, that, oh, by the way, the hard stuff, yeah, that's about ready to come. Like, this was easy compared to the work that you're going to do. So anyways,
Could you, again, just because I've been fascinated and I've gotten the opportunity just to hear, maybe just talk whatever you can just about what your actual role, like, as I know you were operating or manning airspace, and you're in charge of certain airspace, but I also think that you've told me stories, and then I got to be at your retirement, and I got to see people from every branch show up and pay honor to that. And so, just if you could speak to what you guys did when you say, hey, this is what we planned, and this is what we plan going forward.
I'm going to let BigDogg start with this, but just, BigDogg, if you could also incorporate, and I know you can't necessarily talk about it a lot, but the work that you did with the special operations community, being the air, essentially what I would refer to as the air liaison element, the person who integrates all the different air effects, both kinetic and non-kinetic, and how you made them understand what we refer to as the battle space, or battle space management. Because I think, and there's the big picture, right? And then there's also, like, I need to do a very specific operation with an incredible amount of highly talented individuals to achieve a very specific effect. BigDogg had the opportunity to be on a team like that for 2 years, because he was the best that the Air Force had at that time to go do that. So anyways, BigDogg, do you mind answering that question in that context?
Sure. So Cam, I'll start kind of bigger to smaller, as in smaller as in size. So in general, air battle manager responsibility. We talked about the plan, that for Iraqi freedom, enduring freedom, and exercise, it doesn't matter. You'll start out with a plan, and I'll equate it to sports again. We're going to go in the huddle. We're going to call the play. Well, it's taken us a few hours, maybe a few days, a few weeks to come up with that play when we're talking air battle management. And then you walk up to the line and the quarterback looks and he sees a different defensive scheme, or he sees the defenders shifting. That's what it's like for us looking on the radar, looking at the intelligence feed. When we see the adversaries shifting, we see the adversaries come out in a formation. That formation means they're going to employ their weapons or their capabilities in a certain way. We in then turn have to react and change our plan, our audible, for the most part, of how do we now change the offensive game plan, the blue side. How do we align our forces? Are they going out in this big spread formation? Do they have to alternate who is shooting, who's looking down range? Do we have non-kinetic effects? Maybe we have to jam a site. Maybe there's some cyber capabilities that are required before you can get into bad guy land because you want to shut down the eyes. All of that takes orchestration. And that orchestration oftentimes happens airborne. So if you want to see chaos, if you want to see just sheer, like almost anarchy inside of the back of a 111-foot airplane, watch an exercise of the first night of the war. I can imagine what was going on in Smitty's jet the first night of Iraqi freedom. So the responsibility of that air battle management team, and not just the air battle manager, is to know that game plan, listen to up to 4 external radios and 3 internal radios. You ever try to have a conversation with your kids and your wife and on the phone at the same time and be able to process it all? That's what's going on. And then also now you talk to outside the airplane to the cyber, the non-kinetic effects, and then understand if somebody is jamming a non-kinetic effect, somebody is jamming voice communications. A blue person, a good guy wants to jam bad guys. Well, there's probably some bleed over. So now you have to think about, what do we do when I can't talk to somebody? Air refueling is big. When one tanker can't take off because of a maintenance issue, that affects the entire strike package. Now, what do you do when you don't have enough gas for everybody? How do you reflow the targets? So that's the air battle manager world in a nutshell. Smitty mentioned I had the opportunity to deploy what we called the task force at the time. So the task force mission when we deployed was it's very simple. It's their kill capture missions or their hostage rescue missions. For all the reasons we've all seen the movies, for all the reasons that you can think of, very, very small, very, very highly trained group of men and women. And what I had the opportunity to do is the things we talked about on the team at the air battle managers do as a crew. Because it's small, then you have the privilege of being one of one. And so now, instead of this big package where you're trying to focus on killing a lot of bad guys, your package is 6 to 7 men on the ground in places that they probably don't want to go, going and knocking on people's doors to find bad guys or rescue good people. And then you make decisions on, they obviously don't go in there by themselves, right? They have support, they have non-kinetic support, they have kinetic support, they have quick reaction forces. So those decisions that you get to make were now one deep decisions. And you are up close and personal. Smitty talked about the debrief. When those guys come back sweaty, sometimes bloody, and you have done it right, that's awesome. When they come back and you've done it wrong, man, that is a wrong group of people to look in the face and explain why the decisions that you made negatively impacted their mission. So in that world, we called it the battle captain. And so the battle captain's responsibility is just to do that. You're disconnected in proximity, in physical proximity, but the importance you have is just the same. The importance of your role is just the same as most of the men and women who were on the ground. And sometimes when you say disconnected, you're not that far away from them. Sometimes it's pretty close, but the opportunity to manage that battle or to captain that battle and to be their eyes and the ears when they've got night vision goggles on, or blowing open a door, or snatching people up in the middle of the night, and you're helping to make those battle management decisions. It's a pretty awesome task. It was probably one of the best assignments of my life. Most stressful, most rewarding. Talk about instant gratification and the plan. There's sometimes they hit one target and they find what they call SSE, so they do some sensitive site exploitation, and like, holy cow, we can walk a mile down the street, in the middle of the night, walk a mile down the street and go get this next bad guy. So here's the plan. It's as you're rolling, you have literally 2 to 3 minutes to come up with a game plan, and the trust that's required, like, guys got this. they don't know what the plan is to support them. They know that they're going in there and there's a plan and got their back. So one of the most awesome assignments that I think is battle management at its core is understanding the plan, understanding the impact, understanding the ramifications of decisions and the second and third order effects of those decisions, and being able to stand by it and answer to it and be accountable for it, as men and women's lives are at stake. I'm ready to go back and do it again. I'm too old, but it was good times.
Yeah, just as a funny aside, and I'm not making fun of you, BigDogg, because you're obviously exceptionally athletic, but all the things that they made you do that we just kind of took for granted. You know, you used to make fun of me coming from the CRC world. It's a control reporting center world, Cam, where I would deploy to whatever Central South America, literally all over the world, and I had all these different qualifications. BigDogg, like, yeah, man, you guys are whatever. He'd make some funny,
Big
and
dog
then
camp.
all of a sudden he get to this world and he has to shoot and he has to run and he has to swim and he has to climb and he has to do all these different other things, and not in an average capacity, in a well above average capacity. So BigDogg would tell us stories of, hey, I just got done with the swim, and you thinking like, oh, just a couple lengths of the pool, and it's like no,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like literally like swimming the English Channel. I'm being a little bit facetious, but it probably felt like that at
Yeah.
the time.
And one of the, I guess the hardest part about that, Smitty, is the fact that that stuff wasn't fun.
Right.
And but it's a credibility thing, right? I think one of the proudest moments was a guy named General Votel. He was a JSOC commander at the time, and then ended up being the SOCOM commander. Before he left, gave me a coin from one of the units that were there. The term operator is thrown around a lot, but at the time he was just like, he handed me that. It's like, hey, dude, so you're now an operator, and this was in the middle of the jock or the talk in bad guy land, and you're like, holy cow, that this is the dude, right? And you can look up his resume, and when a guy like that tells you something like that, you're like, okay, now all that does is motivate you to do it more and do it better.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, BigDogg, I appreciate literally the story you just told. You literally hit on every single pillar that as we address the colonel and the coach, and as we work with teams, right? Not necessarily the teams, but we work with teams of people. Trust, communication, accountability, seeing the good in the team, and purposeful leadership through your actions. So unsolicited, I literally appreciate you addressing what it is we're going to use to try to help people become the leaders that we think that they can become, and the leaders that we still are aspiring arguably to be.
One of the things that I've been, that I've learned with Colonel Smith is, I think we all think about actionable things and we make plans, and there's I think a lot of people, and I would tell you I'm in that boat, where we probably don't do enough on the debrief. And I've learned more of the importance of that. And again, and I think in a lot of what we try to do is positive, and not that we can't have honest conversation, right? But looking at just my own hockey season this year, I think our successes can be traced back to the debrief I did at the end of last year. And those successes weren't every game, it wasn't, but having that, on the military side, I've learned just how enormous that is, and how I think it's just, in my world, it's just non-existent anymore. It's kind of always looking forward, and so if you guys could just talk about the importance of that, because I think getting better, but I just think it's something we could share with a lot of people.
Yeah, I will tell you. So the importance of the debrief to me, Cam, root cause analysis. So finding the root cause and finding a fix, because you can fix a lot of the other contributing factors, but you're not going to really change that. You're handling the symptoms. You're giving some Tylenol for your headache. I will tell you a funny story. I got to industry and I had a boss who had never been in the military. I was working in the intelligence side of our business, and the space and intelligence side. We had we call it in progress review, an IPR, and it didn't go well. So we started to talk about why it didn't go well. And so I threw some weapons school, some debrief things out there to try to get to the root cause. And then once we identified the root cause, now we can come up with 3 or 4 fixes. My boss, and she was like, holy cow, BigDogg, that's amazing. I don't know how you thought about that. I'm like, yep, just thought of it, ma'am. Kidding. I didn't say that. I did not say that at all. But I explained the power of the debrief, because in business, I mean, I'm in a $7 billion company. They just talk about it and they're like, yeah, that didn't go well. We should do better next time, right? And that, not everybody, but providing the structure that you talked about for that debrief is something that applies everywhere. So getting through it, identifying the root cause and then the fixes, The other important thing about that, as we talked before, is candor. You can't get to the root cause unless everybody is on the same page with leave your ego at the door. Let's talk about what happened. Let's talk about what your role was in what happened, what your intent was. And then once we get that, once we level that, and we're not worried about, I hope I don't look bad, then you can get to it. And one last thing, I'll let Smitty talk. One of the things that I took to my when I was in group command at the Air Force, we had our staff meeting with all the squadron commanders. We'd start out each of the meetings, and the meetings were, and I started with me, which was, here's the decision I made this week. Here's why that decision was wrong. And here's what I would do to fix it. Here's the lesson learned. And so what we're trying to do is normalize that. One, we expect each other to make decisions. We expect each other that these decisions, we expect that everybody who makes a decision is probably going to make a poor decision. The important part is, how do you now fix that, and what's your lesson learned, and when you share that. Smitty mentioned General Greg Gooey. When he was my wing commander and I was a squadron commander, one of the things he said was that a best practice should be a best practice for about 10 minutes, because after that you shared it with everybody and it's just the practice. Right? And then my very last thing, I will encourage you, if you really want to hear a debrief, a guy named Cujo Teschner. I think Smitty knows Cujo, but great guy. He's in my class in college. He taught at the weapons school. He actually taught the debrief academics at the weapons school. He wrote a book called Debrief to Win. I think he wrote a second book, and he goes and talks. One, he's got a great story. He survived colorectal cancer, but just a great human being. And if you really want to talk about a deep dive into debrief, and again, his book Debrief to Win is good. I recommend it. If you're really interested, I'm giving him a plug. I'd get him on your podcast too. He's an amazing individual.
Cam, the only thing that I'll add, just because BigDogg did an outstanding job of talking to it, is in order to have success with a debrief, in a debrief, as a result of a debrief, is to schedule a debrief. And I know that sounds so simple, but I can't tell you how many times that, BigDogg and I, some of the missions we flew, I mean, Cam, they were like a day. Like, you would fly for like 13, 14, 15, 16 hours, and a fighter person, a fighter pilot would go out and do a mission for, say, 3, 4, 5 hours, just because of where they're located. You're exhausted when you get done doing that. Just like you're exhausted when you get done with a hockey game or a football game. And if you win, sometimes you're just like, yeah, woo, we won. And like, you move on to the next thing, or you felt like you have this internal feeling where everything just feels, oh, I feel so good about myself because everything went swimmingly and all and whatnot. But I swear, the second you say we have a debrief, there's just this level of like a pucker factor. Like, okay, now I need to be accountable to somebody about something. And I think that I don't know. One of the things that I feel like, just as a community, or just whatever, from our going back to the weapons school thing, is because you have a debrief, and that debrief might be at 1 o'clock in the morning, it might be the next day, but it holds you accountable for the actions that you took based on the plan that you executed. And I think that in the sports world, Cam, it's no different, right? I have a game, there's a schedule. In a lot of cases, it's a very strict schedule, and we went and did it. And whether that debrief happens right after, or it happens the next day, I think, just like BigDogg said, is identifying the root cause analysis, identifying what the fixes are, and then implementing those fixes. And then, just to Gooey's point, is it's no longer a best practice, it's a practice. And what am I going to do with that? Am I going to share it? Am I going to hold on to it? Or is it now going to become something which is arguably a standard across an entire community, or across the entire, the force, if you will? So that's a great question, Cam and BigDogg. I think getting Cujo on, would be great. And if that's something that you're also interested in being a part of when Cujo's on, I think that'd be pretty special as well.
Absolutely. And Cam, I think applying debrief to sports, one of the other things I would argue is, it's best if it's not led by you as the coach. It's best if your captain or your influencer, whoever that is, leads that.
Yeah, just to brag on Cam real quick, is one of the things that Cam would have his team do is he would have certain people responsible for film, BigDogg. Cam's use of like this, I don't even know the application because it looked like literally Greek to me as I was watching the hockey clips and all that sort of stuff. But he would have different people do that clip and articulate, what was going on and whatnot, and then have his assistant coach maybe do it. And then and people that weren't even the captains or the assistant captains, people that were just part.
I mean, just quickly, we could talk about it was
Yeah.
it was organic, and something that I think held on really close to. I'm the head coach, and this is years ago. We were hitting some speed bumps, and I went in, it was right after Christmas, and I said, the solution is in this room. Like, I really believed it, and I needed them to believe it. And worked with a couple guys, and we were very fortunate to have a student manager and student coach. And he had to stop playing because of injury, but he had a passion to be around the team. And he started this and with one of our players. And we put them in charge of the weekly video meeting, and they tied the bow on the last weekend, and they got to spread that message. And that's when, if you were to look at, again, unfortunately we lost in the finals, but if you were to look at where we picked up momentum, it was when they really took control. And not only did I have to let go of that, but it gave them the power, I think, if anything. And again, Matt saw it from probably a little different view, but that was one of the, I think, more successful things that we deployed. And again, just speaking from my own experience, wouldn't have been something I did years ago. It's been through my growth and with help.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome.
well, I would just like to say thank you, to both of you and for everything. And just to include myself and everybody, just to be open and understanding that there's a lot of people out there that take for granted, I think, what you guys just talked about for the last hour, and probably have no idea, just like I do. So I can say that I sit on the edge of my seat to continue to learn. Again, tickled every day that Colonel Smith wants to take the hockey coach and work with them, but we share a common theme that we love to be around people and help them. So thank you, BigDogg, for taking the time and joining us.
This is awesome. If I could take 30 more seconds, I don't believe in coincidences a whole lot. And, when Smitty first got out to Norwich and was talking about how awesome it was, and then he told me about you and the fact that you guys, 4 years ago now, probably first met. And now this whole concept, I appreciate you guys letting me have a front row seat as you're developing this. But, and I can't think of two better people from very different backgrounds. It's almost like the puzzle pieces, right? That they're so different, but yet they fit together in the right spot. And I think the impact and influence that you're going to have, one, on college kids, which is obviously our future, but number two, just the old guys. Like, I will listen to this all the time, and just listening to your story, Cam and Smitty, I have a couple things that I took away from this after knowing you for almost 3 decades. So, man, I'm glad you guys are doing this. I hope that you continue to do it through all the ups and downs of the pain, and that it's going to be to get this thing going. But I think it's going. I think you're building momentum, and I'm happy to have a front row seat and be a part of it. So thank you.
I mean, if it's in your current capacity, in your current business, great. If it's somebody that you're working with in San Diego, great. If it's someone that is not even in this country that you work with and they're just looking for a little extra edge, we're willing to take that time to spend with them and try to make them a more successful team. But bottom line, BigDogg, we know you're also exceptionally busy, and I saw that by your calendar this morning, the screenshot that you shared with me. But please know that we wouldn't have asked you if we didn't value your opinion, not just as a leader, but as a human being. And you're awesome, and you continue to inspire even people that so-called inspired you at some point in your life. So thanks, brother.
Appreciate it. Love you guys. Proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll see you.
Bye, Big Guy.